Today we are tackling something really fascinating and honestly kind of a tough topic too. How men's and women's roles have changed, especially for folks who see things through that Christian lens. Imagine we're hopping into our time machine way back to the 17 and 1800s,
Wow.
where family was like a whole different universe than today. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
super strict roles and interpretations of the
Right.
Bible that really emphasize separation.
Yeah.
And the societal expectations were just woven into life back then. Are you with me?
Absolutely. And it's so interesting how those roles weren't just like suggestions or anything back then.
Right.
They were tied to religious beliefs and those cultural norms. Just picture a world where men were almost always the providers and the protectors, the heads of the house. Their place was out in the world, in a work business, all that.
Yeah, it's like a totally different world, right? And the women, they were basically running a whole other world, but inside the home.
Exactly. They were the caretakers, the nurturables. They were in charge of the kids managing the house
All the stuff.
and making sure it all ran smoothly. And of course, they were supporting their husbands in their roles too.
So we have this huge division of all the responsibilities,
Hmm.
and it's super deep in how folks interpreted the Bible, A&D, all the societal norms of the time. It makes you wonder how much was religious belief and how much was just how they did things.
That's the million-dollar question because it helps us see how these roles have evolved over time. For instance, some historians point to specific verses in the Bible.
Oh yeah.
Like in Proverbs, where you have the wife of noble character. It talks about her managing the house, working with her hands, providing for the family. That image of a capable woman doing all this inside the home was a big deal back then.
I can see that. It's interesting how those interpretations played out in real life.
Yeah.
I'm picturing a woman back in the 1800s maybe in a small town,
Right.
and her day is packed with stuff that would be a full-time job today.
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget the influence of just the norms back then. Women couldn't get the same education or professional opportunity.
Not even close.
So their roles were often shaped by just practical stuff as much as any religious doctrine.
Like this web of influence.
Totally.
Religion, culture, and just daily life all tangled up. But fast forward to today, and everything's different. We have women running companies, men taking paternity leave.
Yeah.
It's almost like we flipped the script.
We really have, and it's not just in secular society either. Inside Christian circles, the idea of roles has broadened a lot too. There's more focus on balance,
Yeah.
sharing responsibilities, recognizing everybody's strengths and talents. It's not about fitting into this one box anymore.
Right. It's about figuring out what works for each family and for each person,
Uh-huh.
even within their faith.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, though, how these modern views mesh with what the Bible traditionally teaches. Do they clash? Is there tension there?
That's where things get super interesting. While some specific verses might have been used to back up those strict gender roles, if we zoom out and look at the core message, like in Ephesians 5, the focus shifts a bit.
Okay, tell me more about that, because I know a lot of our listeners are going to want to know about Ephesians 5 and how it plays into this.
Well, Ephesians 5 is often mentioned in discussions about marriage, and it does talk about husbands and wives.
Yeah.
But the interesting part is that instead of laying out a bunch of rigid roles,
It doesn't.
it focuses on submitting to each other, love, respect, and serving one another.
So it's not about who's in charge, but more about that spirit of partnership,
Exactly. It's all about the heart behind your actions.
not just fitting into specific roles.
Yeah.
That's powerful because it opens things up for more flexibility and individuality in a marriage, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It acknowledges that what works for one couple might not work for another, and that's okay. As long as the foundation is love and respect and service, there's space for different ways to live that out.
Okay, I'm following you so far. But let's play devil's advocate here. Is there anything we might be missing from those old school, clearly defined roles? I mean, were there benefits to that structure that we've lost as things got more flexible?
That's a great question. And, there's an argument that those traditional roles, with their clear responsibilities, did offer a certain kind of stability
Oh, yeah.
and structure. Families knew exactly what was expected, and for some folks, that could be reassuring and give them purpose.
I can see that. It's like having a blueprint for family life, which could be comforting when the world feels so crazy and unpredictable.
Right. But here's the takeaway. Those same values of stability and purpose and security can totally exist in families today, even if they don't stick to those old school roles.
So it's not about going back to the old ways,
Right.
but figuring out how to build those good parts into families now.
Exactly.
But how do we do that? Things change so fast. It's like the rule book is always being rewritten.
You're telling me. And that brings us to a big question. How do we handle these shifting roles and expectations if we're people of faith, especially those raising families today?
That's what I want to unpack next. So for our listeners who are trying to figure this all out, especially within Christianity, what's the most important thing to remember?
Here's the bottom line. Roles might change, society's expectations might shift, but God's command to love each other never changes. It's about creating a loving and supportive place within your family, whether that means leading or supporting through work or sharing all the responsibilities. It's teamwork.
Teamwork, I love that. So we've got roles that change, interpretations that evolve, but that core of love and service is what matters most. But here's something I'm thinking about.
I'm listening. What's on your mind?
Given all these shifts in roles and expectations, how do we prepare the next generation to build strong, loving families that honor their faith while adapting to a world where the rules are always changing? It's like we're sending them out without a map.
That is a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it requires us to rethink how we approach family faith and the roles we play. It
Yeah.
requires like a shift in our focus. Instead of giving kids this list of rules or telling them exactly what their roles should be,
Right.
we got to give them the tools and the principles to build healthy, loving relationships no matter how society changes.
Okay, I like that. So what kind of tools are we talking about? What can we actually do to get the next generation ready for all these changes?
Well, one of the biggest things is open and honest communication. Teaching young folks how to talk about what they need, what they want, what worries them in a relationship. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's about making a space where both people feel heard and valued no matter what roles they take on in the family.
So it sounds like it's less about saying you do this and you do that, and more about making it okay to talk about everything,
Yes.
where everyone feels safe to share their thoughts and feelings. And that all starts at home, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if kids see the adults in their lives talking openly, they're more likely to do it themselves.
You're so right. Modeling that healthy communication is key, but we have to actually teach those skills too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We can encourage them to really listen to each other, to learn how to say what they mean clearly and respectfully, and to be willing to compromise and work through disagreements together.
I love that. It's like giving them the skills to handle those bumps in the road that every relationship has. And speaking of skills, what about empathy? How does that fit into preparing them for these roles that are always changing?
Empathy is so important. Encouraging young people to really see things from their partner's perspective, to step outside of themselves, is key.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the other person's challenges, what they want to achieve, how they contribute to the relationship.
Yeah.
That helps build respect and appreciation that goes way beyond any specific roles.
It's like switching from me versus you to we're in this together,
Right?
even if we do things differently.
Exactly. And here's another thought. We talked about communication and empathy, but we can't forget about adaptability and resilience.
Oh, that's a good one.
The world's changing so fast, and the family structures and roles that were the norm a while back are still changing too. Giving young people the ability to adapt to these changes, to face new challenges, and to figure out solutions together is essential.
That's super important, especially when the rules are always being rewritten. If we can teach them to be adaptable and resilient, they'll be better prepared no matter what comes their way. But how do we actually teach those skills? It seems kind of abstract.
One way is to encourage them to try new things, to step outside of what's comfortable, to see challenges as opportunities to grow. We can also help them with problem solving by letting them be part of family decisions, brainstorming together, and encouraging them to think creatively.
I like that those are really practical tips. Sometimes I think as parents or mentors, we focus so much on protecting young people from discomfort or failing that we forget those experiences are often the best teachers.
Totally. It's about finding the balance between being supportive and giving them space to grow and learn. And all of this comes back to that central message of Ephesians 5. Love and serve each other.
Yeah.
When we model those values in our own families and teach young people to do the same in their relationships, we're giving them a solid foundation to navigate whatever changes life throws at them.
That's such a good point. But before we move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, shared purpose and vision. How does that play a role in getting the next generation ready for these shifting roles?
Shared purpose is huge. When a couple or a family knows what they're working towards together, it makes all those tricky roles and responsibilities so much easier to figure out. It's like having a common goal that keeps you united, even when the path looks different for each person.
It's like having that North Star to guide you when things get tough.
Exactly.
But how do you actually make that shared purpose happen? I mean, it's not like you could just say, okay, family, this is what we're all about now.
Right. It takes time and lots of conversations and being willing to really hear each other. You could ask each other questions like, what are the values we want for our family? What kind of impact do we want to make on the world? What are our dreams for ourselves and for each other?
I like those questions. It's about looking beyond just the daily grind and really connecting on a deeper level.
For sure. And once you have an idea of that shared vision, you can start to talk about how your individual roles and responsibilities fit into that bigger picture. It's not about forcing people into boxes.
Right.
It's about finding ways to use your own gifts and talents to support each other and work towards that common goal.
I love that idea. It's about realizing everyone brings something important to the table, and those contributions might change depending on what stage of life you're in or the challenges you're facing. We've covered a lot of ground here: open communication, empathy, adaptability, shared purpose. Those are some powerful tools.
They really are. And it's important to remember this isn't a one-time thing. It's always evolving, you know? We're constantly learning, growing, and adapting together.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And speaking of journeys, we've taken our listeners on quite a ride today. We started by going back in time to see those super strict roles from the past. Then we jumped to the present to look at how things have changed. And now we're thinking about the future and how to help the next generation navigate this ever-changing world with grace and wisdom. But before we wrap up, is there one final overarching thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
There is. As we talked about, roles and expectations may shift, but those core values of love, respect, service, and a commitment to building a strong, loving family, those never go out of style.
That's so well said. Those values are important no matter what time period we're in or what society says. And with that in mind, we got to remember this whole thing about roles isn't just some theory, it's real life.
Yeah.
You know, it affects real families,
Yeah.
real couples, real people. And that makes me think about something. We talked about how roles are changing and how we get the next generation ready. But how do we know these changes are actually good for everyone? How do we make sure these new ways of doing things are making families better? Are we moving in the right direction, or are we just changing because change is cool?
That is so important. Honestly, it's something we should be asking ourselves all the time. It's not enough to just say, hey, roles are changing. We have to look closely at how these changes affect men, women, and kids in families. Are people happier? Are things more fair?
Yeah.
Do families feel closer? Or are we making new problems, new imbalances, new things to fight about?
It's like we got to check in and say, okay, how's this really working? Are we building stronger families or just making things more confusing? Sometimes I think in all the excitement of trying new things, we forget about the actual people in the family.
I agree. That's why it's so important to keep talking about it. We need to be open and honest about how these changes are affecting everybody. Are men feeling pressure to be different but still do all the old stuff? Are women feeling pulled in a million directions?
Totally.
Trying to work and take care of the family? Are kids getting what they need in a world where families look so different now?
Those are big questions. It sounds like you're saying there's no magic answer that works for everyone.
Exactly. What works for one family might not work for another. That's why being flexible and able to adapt is so important. We need to be willing to change things up to find what's best for our own families while still sticking to our values. It's about finding that balance between letting people be themselves and keeping the family strong.
It reminds me of that saying, the only thing that stays the same is change. And that might freak some people out, but it also opens up all kinds of possibilities. We can break free from those old expectations and create families that are truly unique and real.
Yeah.
You know, families that reflect who we are.
And that's what's so great about it. We have this chance to build families that are stronger and more resilient and more loving than ever. But it takes work. It takes being on the same page. And it takes being willing to go on the journey even when it gets bumpy.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's not about being stuck in the past or jumping on every new trend. It's about creating our families in a way that honors our faith and makes sure everyone we love is happy and healthy. And I think that's a beautiful thought to leave our listeners with today.
I agree. It's about finding that sweet spot where the old ways and new ideas come together, where growing as individuals and being a strong family go hand in hand. It's about families not just getting by, but really thriving.
This has been an amazing conversation.